Hello, 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 and thank you for checking out the Luttrell Show for Service and Hospitality Entrepreneurs. I'm Jason, and here are the stories for Monday, March 1st. Now, the headlines are, lawmakers are talking about paying landlords directly for restaurant and landlord relief. Restaurant workers oppose the minimum wage in some cases, not all cases. I don't oppose it, for instance. And the third story is restaurant owners in Buffalo fight and beat a COVID curfew, so they had a sympathetic judge there. And then the fourth story is restaurant and service in post-COVID world. And this is a really, really fascinating story from Fast Company. Okay, so the first story is lawmakers propose canceling restaurant rent and providing relief for landlords. I hope this isn't one of those things where it's more for the landlords than anybody else. But so this is a story from New York, and they were saying that that eateries would just pay just 20% of rent owed. So State Assembly Member Harvey Epstein and State Senator Brad Hollingman have introduced twin bills in their respective legislative bodies that would, in effect, cancel rent for some restaurateurs. Restaurants and other businesses would only be on the hook for 20% or 1/3 of their net rent each month, whichever is less. Now, it would apply only to businesses employing 25 workers or fewer, and to those who have lost revenue or been forced to shutter due to the coronavirus pandemic. So, you know, basically every mom and pop bar and restaurant out there. So the bill would also provide a $500 million in rent relief. And now remember, this is a state level effort, so $500 million is actually a lot of money here. And then the mechanics of it are that they would cut checks directly to the landlord on behalf of their tenants. So I'm not really sure how that works as far as back rents issues are concerned, or you know, as far as like if that just like cancels out whatever previous arrangements that they had. But the legislation, if passed, would be part of the fiscal year 2022 executive budget, which has to be approved by April 1st. So hopefully this provides relief for the restaurants, and maybe even lessen some animosity between the landlords and the tenants. Okay, so the next story is about restaurant workers who oppose the raised minimum wage bill. So this is a story coming out of Delaware. There's a Facebook group that I'm sure you can check out called No to HB 94. And it's the No to the number 2 HB 94. Is the opposing House Bill 94 that would change the way the service industry operates. So far, more than 400 people have signed the petition that is available on change.org. And you can find that at Help Delaware Restaurant Workers number 2 HB 94. And so I'm sure that there are similar initiatives in other states, but this one is specifically a Delaware initiative. So under the bill, HB 94, the hourly rate for servers must be no less than 65% of the minimum wage. So if the bill passes and Delaware's minimum wage raises to $15, servers would be paid $9.75 an hour. Quite different than the proposed scale-up message to $15 an hour by, I think, 2025, which is the current on Biden's desk right now. So the summary is workers are worried that the mandated minimum wage will suffer because the perception that the workers are getting paid too much by customers. So, you know, I don't know. I have an idea. You know, this is probably crazy, but if you're listening this far, then you're into crazy. But how about getting rid of tipping altogether and making it mandatory to profit share in the restaurant? The patrons would feel good about rewarding great service, and all the employees would be invested in the success of the place. People would stay longer. They'd be much more part of the community. Also, if everyone's so worried about the restaurant workers, why not tax them less? I mean, everybody's up in arms about paying them more, but how about taxing them less? We're going to go into this in the last story of today, but in New York, at least, the hourly tip rate is usually completely offset by taxes. So we actually take home $0 an hour after taxes, or like we get $2.13 an hour, but we actually have to pay that right back. So how about taxing us less? I don't know, just a thought. Also, if you own your own business, you don't get taxed the same way that employees do. So that's why this is for service and hospitality entrepreneurs, because like you should really start your own business. Even if you work a job, you can still start a business. All right. So the next story is more than 90 West New York bars and restaurants upstate New York bars are free from the COVID-19 curfew again. So this is a story from Buffalo, and a state Supreme Court justice on Saturday ruled in favor of a group of more than 90 Western New York bars and restaurants seeking to stay open past the state's 11 o'clock curfew, continuing a protracted legal ping pong battle between the businesses and the state government. Now, at issue here is the rationale between the state's 3.5-month-old public health curfew enacted by executive order in November to slow the spread of COVID-19. What we understand now is that the actual spread is 1 to 2%, or maybe it's up to 3%, caused by in-person gatherings at bars and restaurants. But it's like 70% from in-person gatherings at people's homes. So the story continues to read that in Saturday's ruling, however, Judge Timothy J. Walker refuted the logic that in strong terms calling irrational the suggestion that the pandemic is not improving and questioning the timing and design of the curfew as a pandemic intervention. He also questioned how the state could justify a curfew after allowing nearly 7,000 people to watch the Bills playoff game at Bills Stadium. So, you know, this is clearly a weird conflict of interest where they're like, okay, 7,000 people at Bills Stadium is okay because there's a lot bigger money and much higher stakes there. But mom and pop restaurants can't do 20, 30 people in their restaurant because they're small bar. I don't know. So the judge actually was very sympathetic to our cause in this situation and made the right decision, and they canceled the 11 o'clock curfew. So I'm guessing it's 2 o'clock now, something like that, whatever the rules are in the city. Okay, so the last story we have today is how we should reimagine restaurant work in post-COVID-19 world. And this comes from Fast Company, who's always a great source and seems to have the ear of the restaurant industry. So seems to have the best interests of the restaurant industry in mind. So this article explains in plain language how messed up the tipping system is and how historically ridiculous and racist the restaurant business has been historically. So also, I wanted to point out that it's written by Saru Jayaraman, who's a co-founder and president of One Fair Wage, which advocates for cities, states, and federal governments to adopt a full, fair minimum wage for all workers with tips on top of that. So she's also the director of labor research of food. She's also the director of food labor research at UC Berkeley. Now, her story is fascinating and awesome. And if you don't know anything about racism in the restaurant industry, you should definitely check this article out. So the story reads that restaurant hospitality workers lost more jobs during the pandemic than workers in any other industry. She goes on to say that the restaurant industry has an ugly history of wage injustice. When the United States government finally formally abolished slavery in the middle of the 19th century, the restaurant industry wanted to keep using unpaid labor. And through a network of well-heeled restaurants that would become the National Restaurant Association, one of the most powerful corporate lobby interests in the nation. Now, for almost a century, many restaurant workers, most of whom were formerly enslaved black men and their descendants, were literally paid a $0 wage. They were expected to rely entirely on tips as wages, not only an inherently immoral arrangement, but an impractical one, given that customers grew up in a nation that had not seen fit to pay black workers since its inception, let alone treat them with any dignity. So a century later, when the federal government established a universal minimum wage for American workers, restaurant workers were explicitly excluded. And then she quotes a statistic saying that 84% of restaurants violate labor standards, including tip violations. Now, this isn't the same people, like I think it's important to note here that a lot of times when people violate tip statutes and wage and hour laws, they don't do it intentionally. But it's so difficult to manage and navigate the wage and hour laws. They're so complex and it's so difficult to manage that most of the time, I would say that part of this 84% is people who do it unwittingly or who do it on accident. Like I remember working many shifts for 12, 16 hours without taking breaks, but it wasn't because I was being treated unfairly. If I wanted to go, I could have gone. But technically, they should have told me I had to leave and go on break. But it's there's like weird calculations based on how many hours you're working, what your job function is, and then there's splits of those things. It's like you need somebody just to manage that by itself. Okay, so the story continues to read that imagine this as a pre-existing condition in the industry that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated. It was hard enough to make ends meet as a restaurant worker before. The pandemic made it impossible. Of course, this is because restaurant workers are struggling, and thus owners and managers are struggling too. But workers were always living tip to mouth. Now tips are down reportedly by 50 to 75% for those who have gone back to work. One of every 4 Americans who have lost their jobs because of coronavirus fallout is a restaurant worker. Think about that. 25% of all the people that lost their jobs worked in restaurants because of coronavirus. So while tips and wages for restaurant workers are plummeting, sexual harassment is rising. Low-wage restaurant workers who are predominantly women of color face an impossible bind, a bind in which they've been placed in by the restaurant industry. So the federal raise the Wage Act, the one that the author works for, which includes ending the sub-minimum wage and increasing the federal minimum wage for everyone to $15 an hour, was incorporated into President Joe Biden's pandemic recovery plan. The wage increase looks unlikely to pass the Senate. So I don't know if you've been watching these news things, but I'm actually in favor for a raise, a $15 an hour raise. I don't think that there's a compelling argument against it, but I think that there's a moral argument against it, against not doing the minimum. I think there's a compelling moral argument for raising the minimum wage. So that's all I got for you today. For story ideas, comments, errors, and omissions, please send a message to Jason Luttrell on any social media platform, or email me at podcast@jluttrell.com. All articles are property of their original publisher, so please be sure to check out the show notes for links to the source articles, especially the last one on Fast Company. Head to our group, Service and Hospitality Entrepreneurs, on Facebook to join the discussion, or search for Jason Luttrell on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, or subscribe to The Luttrell Show wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Jason Luttrell, and I will see you next time.